Good morning. So some of you were at the party. I expected we'd find a few people sleeping in the aisles this morning, but I guess they dragged those people away. Thank you for getting up, not that early, but coming in. And thank you, David, and the wonderful event space, which is quite an asset to the photography community in New York. It's like this ripe fruit, and you squeeze it and you can get all kinds of different juices out of it. Yeah, it's quite wonderful the way it goes on. I've wondered how formal to be in this talk this morning, and I decided not to be terribly formal, but I have some things that I want to get through, and then a few things that we're going to do, and then a few things, a little time at the end, I hope, for a little back and forth. Just to see what we might have missed or what curiosities people might have. I will say that I did notice in this morning's paper, I don't know if you saw it, a review of a life's work, a retrospective of the work of Dwayne Michaels. It's just opened in Pittsburgh, got a wonderful review, and I would seriously consider flying out there to see it. My hope is that they'll bring it into New York, because Dwayne is kind of like the Robert Frank of funny and profound. You know, he's that influential and that much in our DNA here. So read the article if you like. And on my website there are two interviews actually with Dwayne, which I did years ago. They're very stimulating, and he kindly let me reproduce the introduction that he wrote to his portraits book, which challenges every idea of portraiture that you may ever have had, and it's in the book, and I'm very grateful to Dwayne for letting me do that. So I'm glad to see this show in Pittsburgh, and I hope it'll come into New York at some time pretty soon. So this book, this started 3 years ago this week, when a fellow from a large photographic publishing house said, "I've heard about your workshop. Is there any way that you can put your creativity workshop into a book?" And I said, I have no idea. But I went off and I wrote some chapters, and I wrote a table of contents and looked at it and thought, maybe this could work. The thing that is not there is the group aspect of things, because when we do some of these exercises with other people, we all get the benefit of everybody else's experience. I thought, how can I make up for that? Well, I may have, I don't know. People read it and say it works. So it's taken 3 years to get it down. What did happen was that once I got going, and once I looked at the publisher's list and the kind of things they did, and they did a lot of software training and Photoshop training and that kind of thing, I said, if I try and put what I do into that format, it's either going to blow the format up and they'll say, no, we've got to stick with the format, or it's just going to neuter what it is that I do. So I met with a guy with my stuff, and I said, I don't see how this is going to work, but we've stayed friends. He agreed, and we've stayed friends, and he actually read several versions of the book going along. So the wonderful thing is that now, because of ebooks and iBooks and that kind of thing, we can save a $60,000 printing bill and shipping bill, and make this thing that can be gotten out there. So it's so now it's out there, and I'm going to. I had these little things printed, and I have a lot of them. So you would be doing me a favor if you would take one of these. Then I won't have to carry them back to Connecticut. You can just hand them out. But I set up a website. Part of the way I wanted to make the experience a bit more groupy than reading a book was to set up a website with some galleries on it, with some assignments on it, with a few chapters on it, so people who have not even read the book, but you can look at the assignment or the exercise and try it. And if you get something you like, send some pictures up, and we'll put them online. And we'll see what comes out of that. Here's what I want to do today. I don't want to sell you a book today, but I want to talk about what wound up in it and how I got to it, because I think I hope it's provocative. So I'm going to suggest some things that you might do. We'll actually do some of them here, maybe, create a little experience for them. But what I really want to do is to stir things up a bit, and make you a little more uncertain about what you're doing, because that's where the good work gets done. And at the end, by the end, I'd love to have convinced you that there are many places to look for photographs other than the viewfinder of a camera, and many ways to capture things other than with a camera. And I should perhaps not say that in the midst of this camera store. We're in the beating heart of B&H here. But you still use cameras, and I get mine here, so I guess I'll get out unbruised. Lots of places to look other than your viewfinder, and lots of ways to look other than with a camera, principally with this wonderful Oriental word which they use, which means heart-mind, which combines the head and the heart, and ways to get at using that. This realization started for me many, many years ago when I first took a photograph that was bigger than I was. And that was a paradox. I thought, how can that be? How can it be that I can bring forth this thing that I don't know anything about from inside myself? And I decided I'd better look into that. Before that, I thought I'd be a writer. I thought I'd write little essays, and maybe they would be published in the New Yorker and people would read them, and that's how I would make my living. Garrison Keillor had this wonderful line once. He said, I was 25 years old, I was living in New York writing for the New Yorker, although they didn't know it at the time. And that's sort of what I was doing. But because I have attention span issues, I walked into a theater right after graduating from college. And it was so immediate and so exciting. It was the first year that the theater existed. It was in New Haven. It's called the Long Wharf Theater, a resident theater. And it was at one of its most exciting times, which is the birth. And I walked in, and they said, do you want to come do something here? And I said, yes. And so I started out as an apprentice, and then I was in the acting company. And I also did lighting design. I was technical director for a short while. And so I did just about everything you can do in a theater. And it was just wonderful, because I was actually working in theater instead of waiting on tables in New York and taking classes and doing a showcase twice a year. I was doing something to do with it every night. But photography was the thing that I followed furthest when it finally hit me, and because you could do it alone. If you want to do a play, you have an idea, and maybe you have a script, and the next thing you need are $175,000 and a rehearsal space with about this many chairs, and you start to work. Whereas a photographer, you could just walk out with your camera, and at the end of the day, you could come back with this then roll of film, now a bunch of files, and you had done something, and there it was, and you could trace it to yourself. The collaborative aspect could be gotten there, but you didn't need all those other people if you didn't want to, and that was good, because I couldn't get people to follow me. So in my during that process of working with photography, I began to think that what I learned might be a little unusual, and I think it is. I think it's as much to do with unlearning things as it is to do with learning things, maybe more so. And I thought this might be something that I could pass along. So photography, if I could describe the arc in the beginning, it was literally like walking through the forest and into a clearing, and there's a white horse munching on this perfect grass. And I went up to the horse and I sort of stroked it, and like that. And I thought, okay, I wonder if I could get on. So I gingerly got on, and it didn't throw me off, but it started to move. And it started to move, it started to trot, and it started to run. And it kept running for many, many years, me hanging on. And I It took me to places that I had no idea were even there. I never would have thought my way to these places or sought them, but it carried me along places out in the world, prisons, monasteries, all kinds of places, and places inside too. And so during the course of the first many, many years, I spent training the horse until I got it to the point where I could get it to do anything I wanted it to do. The horse would do it. And at that point, I was well embarked on sort of the commercial phase, the work for clients phase of my career. But at a certain point, I realized that something had gone missing, and that what I needed to do was to teach the horse to run away again. And that is a lot of what this book is about and these exercises are about. Your horse may not have gotten to that point yet, and it works on the way up the curve as well as down the other side. But that's sort of how this book came about, and how a lot of what is in it came about. So I in the course of teaching over many years, I put together some means to try to pry us loose from various limiting habits. Try to find ways that overall that we could return to the spaciousness of mind that was in play in our earliest days of photography, and that made it so compelling. There was nothing we had to do. Nobody expected anything of us, and it was like being 3 years old or 5 years old. If you remember those, how you could go on a bike ride for a whole summer afternoon and come back at the end of it, and your mother would say, "What did you do?" And you'd say, "Nothing," but you saw everything. You were totally engaged with things. Well, if we could get back to that in our photography, or if you still got a trace of it, preserve it, keep it alive, feed it, make a pet out of it, make a friend out of it. That would be a very important thing. When there are two things that can happen. You can either become a professional photographer, at which point your explorations are not in demand. Clients often say, "We want your eye. We want what it is that you can see," and they're all lying. Every one of them. They want what they can see through your eyes. Or if you can get involved in fine art photography, and you do things that people respond to, so you do that again, and they respond again, and you do that again, and pretty soon you're in this closed loop of God, your admirers become your clients, and you impose this thing on yourself, which is if people don't like my new work, I've gone wrong. One of my heroes is Herman Melville, who wrote 2 very popular books, and then said, "I'm going to write the book I want to write," and wrote Moby Dick, and everybody hated it. And he was defiant. He said, "Well, I'm going to write another book, and you're going to hate that too," and they did. And that was his career, but he was desperately honest. I'd rather admire him from this distance than be his child or be his friend. Apparently that was all very difficult. But it's something to remember and something to try to keep in mind as you're doing your work. So this is what I've come up with, I think, is applicable to people who are locked up a little bit, or people who are just beginning. I've done this, actually, a lot of these exercises I've done with photographers, obviously, but I've done them with doctors, and I've done them with editors. I've done them with a group of women who had very serious forms of cancer. And I did them with child soldiers, ex-child soldiers in Africa, ex-child soldiers and street people. And it works with every one of them. So, which is what makes me think I'm really onto something. We use a lot of things outside of photography. We use just paying attention. We use music. We use theater games, all kinds of things that just engage you back at that first level when you are early on in photography and you're like this, but then you're like this, and that's what happens. And then you take a picture, and with any luck, it's in focus, and with any luck, it comes out. But that's something you can work on. The other thing, the seeing, you don't have to work on. You just have to get back to being 2 years old again, and it'll be fine. So, do you ever hear the story about Winston Churchill? He's giving a talk someplace in the Midwest, and they put a glass of water on the podium, and he talked for a while, and he took a drink from the glass, and he went all over the place, and nobody had told him that it was supposed to be gin they were supposed to put in there. I should have done it. So the general subject of this book, the stuff of this book, is creativity, and it's sort of wearing the clothing of photography, but it really it applies to all kinds of any kind of artistic work. We've had painters in the class, and actors, and musicians, and that kind of thing, and we use a lot of stuff from music and from painting, writing, everything, just to re-engage things and sometimes I call it the class setting the photographer aside, because that guy can get in the way from time to time. So the subject is stochastic. So the talk is stochastic, and stochastic is my new favorite word. It means that you can sort of generally predict how something's going to work out, but you can't be accurate about it at all. So so if the talk seems stochastic to you, it's because it is, and that's because the subject is. And it's also because my learning has occurred stochastically, and the book came from what I've learned. I've tried to order the book a bit and the talk a bit, but not too much. First of all, it doesn't quite line up, and secondly, I've always liked. I don't know if anybody else here reads books by going to the chapter that seems the most interesting to them and hopscotching around, and so that's sort of the way things work. And if you look at the book, you can go through it. In the course of a week in a class, we go through it, some stuff in sort of a line, but after that you can wander around in any direction you like, and should be. So people will make their own order out of things. The book is really a group of provocations. Lays out some ideas, some what's the word? Photographic, neuro-creative groundwork for it, which may or may not be accurate. I have doctor friends who tell me it's somewhat accurate, and it's accurate enough. Let's put it that way. But then it mainly involves doing things. It mainly involves doing things. And it's not so much about the result that comes from doing those things as a practice in getting into the state in which you do them. And suddenly the thing that seems like an accident is not an accident, it's this again. And it definitely works by doing. I saw an article just last week about John Dewey. So we know John Dewey, Dewey Decimals and all that stuff. He was an educator around the turn of the last century, started a school in Chicago. He was a philosopher, education guy, and instead of teaching people math, he taught them how to bake, because they could get into math and physics and what happens when you heat something and so forth. And so everything he did was sort of based on doing a project, and that's exactly what I sort of stumbled to in my looking around. But let me tell you a little bit about how I got tangled up in photography in the first place, and was surprised again and again by it. As I said, I was thinking about writing, but I blundered into theater. It was the first job after college, so it was creative. Theater is creative. And I did theater full on, day and night, and rose to the level at which I was incompetent. Whose law is that? Peter. Okay. So yeah, because I could do a little acting, I could do a little directing. I knew where the hammers were kept and the tape measures, and they said, let's make this guy production stage manager. So they did. It was totally inappropriate, but they made me a manager. And at that point, it really kind of stopped being that much fun. It stopped being any fun at all. And I decided, well, I'll get through this season and then I'll leave. So I was kind of marking time until May came and the season ended. And one night I was running lights for a picture call. Picture call is where the cast comes together after a show or after a preview, and the photographer takes pictures for publicity and that kind of thing. And I got kind of intrigued by what the photographer was doing. It's not that he was directing the action, because that had all been taken care of, but he was immersing himself in it in a very intense way. So here's the love scene being played out by these people, and he's in there like this, you know, and he's like, it's like a love triangle, you know, it's this one guy. And it combines elements of photography and composition, and also Tai Chi, because you're responding to this and moving that way. And I thought, that's really interesting. That looks like it could be fun. And it was. And I also liked his machines. I liked these little black machines that he had. They were very capable. God, I found my old Nikon F4, and I was going to bring it in. I think I forgot to bring it in. I was going to show you the machine that got me going. So very, very interesting. And because I was leaving, I thought I was going to take a trip. I was going to take after college, and I'd postponed it. But I thought, well, I'll take that trip and I'll take a camera, because what do you do on a trip? You take pictures. So I went out and got a camera for no better reason than that. That's how I got into photography, or photographing. So I took that trip, and when I came back, I really had no plan, as I had no plan ever. But when I came back, I thought, well, taking pictures had caught me, so I just kept doing that to fill the time. And I thought that something would turn up, which wasn't really true. I wasn't thinking ahead at all. I was just wandering around, you know, the things we do, abandoned houses, gritty reality, things that had nothing to do with my reality, basically. It was a way to enter other universes. Then the theater called me up and they said, could I take a few pictures for them? Well, that was great, because everybody knew me and I could sort of really integrate into things that were going on. So I started doing that, and they would pay me. It wasn't much, but it was perfect. It was just let me keep on going. So in a way, fate had handed me a complete delusional package and the means to support it. I would do this until I picked up regular work for some of the big magazines. That was going to be great. They were the pinnacle of photography then. They were what everybody wanted to work for, Life and Look, at the top of the heap. If you saw the Robert Frank show at the Met a few years ago, he tried several times. He did little essays. There were auditions to work for Life, and he showed them to him, and that was the club that everybody wanted to join, and they wouldn't take him. They wouldn't take him. But if you look at the essays, Robert Frank is in there. You can see that there's something very different about the work that he did for them. So that's, anyway, what I thought I would do. And then while I was working at one theater, we were doing a play by a guy named Jules Pfeiffer, who has a wonderful new book out. I think it deserves the Book Title of the Year award. It's called Kill My Mother. I don't know if you've seen it. It's really good. It's really interesting. Anyway, Jules had written a play called Little Murders, and it had been done the year before on Broadway, and it had bombed very badly. But I'd seen it in London at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I thought it was really good. So I said to him, you know, what about Little Murders? I mean, I saw it, and I thought it was terrific. He said, well, we shouldn't have done it on Broadway. We should have done it off Broadway, and we are, and it's opening in a few weeks. So I went to Look magazine, where I had a contact, and I said I was a very good friend of Jules Pfeiffer, which is quite an exaggeration, and he had this play coming up, and I thought it was very good. Would they be interested in an article? And they said, well, if it opens and if it's a hit, you can do a piece on Jules Pfeiffer. So it opened, and it was a hit, and 6 months after buying my first camera, I had my first article in Look magazine. I thought, this is it. This is easy. There's nothing to this. And it was never easy again. It's never been easy one time since then. But it handed me this great delusion that I could do this. Shortly after I did a piece in Look, they went under. But I did do a piece for Life, and then they went under. So nobody would hire me, of course. and really it's because there were all these people on the street with 50 stories, and I had one, you know. So there was no competition. Something did turn up, however, and what it was somebody asked me to do an ad for them. And I was convinced that they had seen my work and seen that although I was young, I was quite talented, maybe unusually talented, and I could do this ad for them. What I didn't know was I was cheap. They'd hired me because I was cheap, and I could probably come back with something or other. So we drove off to Boston, and we did a picture of this rug dealer and his rugs, and they gave me $500. And I thought, this is terrific. For $500, let's see, if I did like 2 or 3 of those a month, I could do other things, just whatever I wanted to do. So that was my business plan at the time, which was to look upward and pray and hope. And I got the answer, which was in the form of this big delusion that this could really work. And without intending to, I'd fumbled and tumbled into photography as easily as falling into a pile of leaves. I had never studied photography. You pretty much couldn't at the time. There was RIT, which was more technical, and then that was about it. Walker Evans was in a basement at the art department at Yale, and a few people would work with him, but that was the way it was put together, quite ad hoc. Although I did work very hard at it. I just jumped in and it all worked out because the fact is photography is not that hard. It's not that hard. You'll get your first good photograph long before your first good painting, or even a painting that anybody will even look at for more than 30 seconds. So, and it's even gotten easier now with the automation of things. Getting work has not gotten easier. That's gotten harder. But photography itself has gotten easier. But there was a big lesson in this, which is that you don't always have to know things or study them in order to do them. Be it theater, photography. Not true of surgery. Not true of a number of things. But artistic things are in you. Some sense of harmony, some sense of balance. And I was in a poetry class once, and this guy said, I'm going to go get my MA in poetry. And the teacher said, why do you want to do that? He said, because I want to write. She said, don't study poetry, for God's sake, write poetry. And it's really true. Arthur Rimbaud, is anybody familiar with the French poet who was, if you like Bob Dylan or Patti Smith or Lou Reed or any number of other people, you are admiring descendants of Rimbaud, who at age 16 transformed French poetry, and at age 21 decided that was enough of that, and he went off to Africa and became a gun runner. Who thinks these things up? Fascinating man, but his poetry just was not based on anything else. It was based on this kind of direct seeing and contact and expression of things. So he's always been kind of an inspiration too. So there I was, tottering along, and something else happened. Something else tumbled in front of me. Somebody asked me to take over their class at Manhattanville College, which is near here. Neil Slavin, a guy named Neil Slavin, said, I want to go do something else. Will you finish up my semester? I had no credentials, no qualifications, but they were desperate, and they didn't know how to find a photography teacher because there weren't any, basically. So anyway, they hired me, and I went, and then I did the next semester, and I stayed and stayed. If I'd thought for 1 second, I'd have realized that this was probably a big mistake and I was unqualified. But I didn't think about that, which is probably the secret of my success. I just went ahead and did it. So I took a bunch of college kids and taught them picture taking with cameras. And as you know, that takes about 3 weeks. So what do you do for the rest of the semester? Within a month or so, we were looking at their pictures and starting to talk about them. And now they started to look for interesting things to take pictures of. But when they got some interesting pictures, it was not the subject, it was not the interesting things that made them interesting. It was something else. And we spent our time trying to unravel what that something else was. It was not the things in them, it was the way they had been seen, it was the creativity in them that made those things come alive. You all know, if you've ever taken a picture, somebody has said to you, hey, that's interesting, why don't you take a picture of that? And you look, and it's not interesting, because you're not interested. Somebody once said to Jay Maisel, you guys know Jay, at least by reputation. He said, somebody asked me, how do I take more interesting pictures? I looked at him, I said, be a more interesting person. And it's true, it's really true. So it's that delicious paradox that occurs when you take a picture that surprises you, that completely surprises you, that seems bigger than you are. Seems like you did not have those things in you, and there they are on your file. That is the thing that grabs you. It's like, my favorite image is that there's a man in a black cape, and you're standing someplace and you're taking pictures like this, and this man comes up and he says, may I borrow your camera? Thank you. Walks away. Later that afternoon, you're going through your stuff, and there's this picture on it. You think, how did that get there? I couldn't even take that picture. And it's the man in the black cape. It's this part of you. And you say, what people say in the beginning, it's an accident. It's not an accident. It's that all kinds of things lined up together, and there it was. And then the question is, how do you get back to that? How do you get back to that? But what makes that happen? Nothing makes it happen. Nothing makes something new happen. It's there in you. It's creativity. It's the paradox of seeing. It's there all the time, and creativity is not a thing that you do from time to time. It is a state. It is a state. And you step aside and you allow it to fully flower. And you don't have to wait for it. We mostly wait for it or go to interesting places. But you don't have to wait for it. You can provoke it. It doesn't begin with trying to make an interesting picture. That's not the way to provoke it. It begins with seeing widely, seeing deeply, not thinking about what it is that you're doing. You have always had this awareness, and you have it now, but it can get plastered over with purpose and control. So imagine this room, imagine a photographer walking in here and looks around, says, where are the pictures here? That person is kind of interesting. Maybe that's an interesting light thing happening with the figures going by outside and that kind of thing. They see one room. They have a lot of purpose. A Secret Service agent might walk in, and the president is speaking here in half an hour, and he's going to look around and say, where are the doors? Where are the windows? Can we block those off? He sees a different kind of room, different kind of possibilities in that room. An interior decorator would walk in and say, we need some sofas, we need to change the carpet, something like that. But if a 2-year-old walked in, they wouldn't be looking for anything, and they would see much more than any of those other people. They would see possibilities, and they wouldn't even say there's a possibility, but they would be just aware of it, just simple awareness. And if you gave that 2-year-old a camera, it would be very interesting. I had a friend who taught someplace, and he gave his son, who was more than 2, he was 3, a little point and shoot. And he had a show of the work, and people were just astonished by it. They were actually kind of depressed by it, because this little 3-year-old had seen more interesting pictures than they had labored to produce. So it's there. It's there in the beginning. And if you've looked at a child's drawing, I saw one the other day, he'd drawn an animal with a head on each end, you know. And then that will get factored out. Somebody will say, well, that's nice, Levi, but there are no animals with heads on each end, so he'll stop drawing that stuff. And so we go, and that's what our education does for us. And thank God for the left brain. I don't know, where would we be without it? You know, I want all my surgeons to be very left-brained people. Not all of them. I had a guy in my class once. He was a cardiologist, and he said, they think of me as the creative cardiologist in my hospital. I said, what does that mean? He said, when The other guys get something they can't figure out. They give it to me to try and figure out. And I look at it and my thinking is, what else? What else? It's a thing that goes on in the medical profession. As I mentioned, I worked with doctors at various times, and they're, especially students, the medical students these days, the priority is to have the right answer and not to ask the right questions, but to get to the right answer as fast as you can. And their teachers are sort of bothered by this, because if you've been to a young doctor lately, you sit opposite, they talk to you like this and they're reading your reports, and they said they've gotten so technology oriented that something is going missing, some intuition is going missing. I had a guy in class, and he said he taught at Harvard for 25 years. He said, all those years, I go out in the waiting room, my patient, I get them up, I walk in with them. I just want to walk with them. I want to walk behind them. I want to see what other clues could I possibly see by walking with them. And he said, in this class, he said, medicine, I fear, has lost its soul to some extent. They do too much by the book. The next guy in the class was introduced himself. He said, I'm a pediatric emergency room physician, surgeon. I do everything by the book. So it was great to have these two guys in the same class, because they got a little closer together in the course of it. So this 2-year-old is the one who's seeing and the one who is aware. I gotta think for a second. Where's that? There's something we were gonna do, and maybe we'll do it now. Okay. So what I'd like to do, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. Well, let's first do a little exercise in getting outside ideas and getting into another state. So, could we have the house lights, please? Here's another one that he refers to, that Gene referred to. I don't know if we can do it or not. Okay, let's try this. Okay, we're going to try this. So, this will entail you being up on your feet, so you can leave your stuff on your chair. And there will be a good bit of cooperation involved in this. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to move around the room. And we have all this space that we can fill up. You can go anywhere here. But just before you do that, let's spread out a little bit. Look around the room and find something that you can fix your eyes on, the center of your gaze. Okay? And face it. And without changing the center of your gaze, let your awareness go out as far to the right as you can. What is out there? Just shapes, light, dark. This is not where your sharp vision is, so it will be impressionistic, but just there's quite a lot out there. And just look at that, keeping your gaze centered. And now, let that go, and keeping the gaze in the same place, let your attention go out to the left as far as you can. What is different out there? Is it emptier, fuller, sort of the same? And now, let your attention go out in both directions. So you're seeing the whole sweep. And slowly and carefully, just start to move toward that thing a little bit. And you may have to go around chairs, you may have to go around people, but keep your gaze wide. Keep your gaze wide. If you wear glasses, you can sometimes benefit by taking them off. And look at things start to change out there. Look at things starting to change. And when you get a chance, when you come up against a chair or something, change direction, find something else to look at. And then look at what's happening outside in that periphery. and then change again. But stay in the peripheries. Are there fewer people, more people? What is the energy? And keep moving to the extent that you can in this tiny room. So what did you notice in that wide field? It's like a GoPro, huh? Save $500. But when you're walking around, when you leave here, when you go out, and you see, oh, there's the new Canon, there's the door, there's David, and it's like the guy in the park with a nail on the end of his stick picking up papers. You look at this, you look at this, you look at this, and it's always the center. And this stuff contributes, it's there, but if you really consciously include it, you really start to see another kind of, you see a whole image. You see a whole image. And the other thing, if you do it right, if you do it enough, you don't talk about it very much. You don't describe it. You're not saying white-haired woman with glasses, woman leaning back, that kind of, you're not, none of that happens. And it's a different kind of consciousness and a different kind of construct, and it just deals you, instead of looking at one card at a time, you get all 52 spread out in front of you. You think, wow, what can I do with that? And as with Gene up here, in that exercise, when you do it, you go into this state of not talking about things, and you're a 2-year-old, and you can get at it very, very quickly. It's very hard to hold on to, though. It's extremely difficult to hold on to, because you want to go to, what's this all about? What chapter is this? What's the point of this? I don't get this. I sort of get it, but and you start this discussion for meaning. We'll talk about making sense of things in a second. But that's just a little way to taste some of these things, and you probably have not moved through any space like in that state for however many years you've been on Earth, minus 3 or 4 or something like that. So, I think that maybe one of the reasons we all get so intrigued by photography after we've been studying medicine or working in a bank or whatever it is that we do, where things have to come out. One of the intriguing things about photography is you can go into this childlike state and things don't have to come out, and that's really, really very compelling. It's, I would say that in a moment of that, it has, maybe there's an addictive aspect to this. And I've talked about it a little bit with some people, but I haven't really looked into it, because I should be taking pictures and not thinking about how to take them more. But one of the rewards of doing this, and the things that drags you into photography, is just this experience, just this wandering around where it doesn't have to mean anything. Todd Hito, does anybody know Todd Hito's work? Very interesting guy, kind of an odd duck, if I may say so, in a good way. And I heard him give a talk, and he just paused. He was showing this interesting work, and then he paused in the middle of it, and he said, I think I may be addicted to the feeling of having just taken a good picture. And I knew what he meant. I knew, when you find that thing, or you have an afternoon like that, maybe you get some dopamine. I don't know what it is, but there's a very pleasant association of just dropping this stuff and taking a leap. Somebody said something else earlier about it, and I wanted to touch on it, and this is the moment. Gregory Orr is a wonderful poet, extraordinary poet. And he wrote a book about why people write poetry. Why does somebody do this? There are very few rewards. You can't be a superstar poet. I don't think there's just 1 or 2 of those maybe in a generation. And yet, it's an entire industry. There's a publishing industry that I don't know how to monetize it, but it's big, and it's people writing poetry and publishing poetry, their own or somebody else's. And they don't write poems about getting up in the morning, seeing it's a lovely day, taking the dog for a walk in the park, and just finding that everything is pretty nice out there. People don't so much write poems about that. If they get up and they try and take the dog for a walk, and the dog won't go, but he growls at something behind them that they can't see, or the light in the park suddenly seems strange and alien, and a thought process begins that looks beyond, saying, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why do I feel this way? Why is the dog growling? Why aren't I contented? And that is the beginning of a poem if you follow it. Something you don't understand, something that perturbs you a little bit. And when I say poem, same thing with a photograph. Same thing with a photograph. And then you make something coherent out of it. You organize your picture or you organize your poem. You may not ever even say what it is, but you're conveying that sense of perturbation. What Orr is saying is that people write poems or take pictures to make sense of things that are unresolved, which is an awful lot of stuff, let's face it. They write to make sense of things, not to find the sense of things, which I think is an interesting choice. Historians do it, philosophers do it, bloggers do it for sure. You could go further, and people have, and suggest that people construct entire lives and beings and bodies of work. I remember a photographer saying it wasn't I'll use my own name, it really wasn't a Sean Kernan picture. And the minute I start chasing Sean Kernan pictures, my work is going to maybe impressive, but it's not going to be as alive as it was. One of the first critique when people put up their work, what I say is, don't ask if it's good, ask is it alive? And if you get alive, good takes care of itself. But if you get good, it may or may not be alive. And you probably all know that on a gut level. Let me read you a little poem by Gregory Orr. It goes, the way the word sinks into the deep snow of the page, the dead deer lying in the clearing, its head and antlers transparent, the black seed in its brain, parachuting toward earth. Oof. If I could take a picture that good, I would be very happy. And it's a series of images, and they cohere around something. Maybe they cohere just around the voice, but there's obviously it's an enormous and troubling thing. Well, he wrote an article, gosh, within the last month or 6 weeks in the New York Times Book Review about that poem, among other things, and it's one of those terrible stories where, you know, two brothers, 8 and 10 years old, are out hunting with a single .22, and they come to a fence, and the one boy should hand the gun to his brother, go through it. He doesn't. He tries to go through it carrying the gun, and he shoots his brother. And he wrote about that event and just going into his room and just never ever wanting to leave it again, and how somehow coming to that poem didn't resolve it, but it's like an oyster putting pearl around a grid of sand, you know, and you make something else out of it. It's why you can write about something or photograph something that's very, very difficult and look at it and say, that's great, I nailed it. You know, it actually feels good to have done this difficult piece of work. So he also talked about how people work at their threshold, and they know what their threshold is, and if they can get practice going a little bit over it, they'll work on something. If they stay well on this side of it, that's the work. But the work that you want to do is on or over the threshold. Richard Serra, the sculptor who works in these 200-ton pieces of steel, does these enormous structures. If you don't know his work, they're just fantastic. You don't look at them, you go into them and feel their weight. So he was giving a talk not too long ago, and there were a bunch of young art students there, and he took questions, which was great. And one of them raised their hand, and they said, how do you resolve or set aside your anxieties so that you can begin your work? And he said, you don't resolve them. You don't set them aside. That's where you begin. He said, if you're not anxious about your work, it's because you haven't begun it yet. And you're anxious because you don't know what the outcome is, and if you're going to do it well or not, or if you're going to be able to deal with the hard work of it or the difficulty of it. And if you can't do that, then it's not going to work. But you have to go out on the limb. You have to walk out on the beam on the 2x4, even if it's imaginary. So the work that we remember tends to be stuff like that. I'd always wanted to go to Africa, and but you don't just get a plane ticket and land in Kampala and say to the taxi driver, "So, what's going on here?" Somebody asked me, and I got there with kind of a thing in mind that wasn't really working. He said, there's this little boxing club on the other side of town. Why don't you just stop over there, see if you like it? And I went, and man, I was down the rabbit hole. And I spent the next 7 days there, and then I went back 3 months later, and then I went back a year after that. And I'm getting ready to go back again, just because it throws me off. I took a kind of picture that I don't really take. Well, it's about time, what will get me to do that? And I'll show you actually a little bit of something from there. The tail end of that little video, I think I have here. Yeah, I do. Good. This is how it started. So, the second day I was there, I was down at the gym. I took that picture. It was about light and sweat and physicality and all that stuff. And I looked at that and I thought, I'm a goner. That's it, So to complete that, Thatcher Cook, who got me here, invited me to the Crow Reservation. Now I would no more turn up in an Indian reservation and say, hey guys, can I hang around and take some pictures? I wouldn't do it. But we had an entree, and I've now been back 3 times and working on this longer video about them. And that's the other thing that has happened, which is letting go of photography and going into this time-based thing, which has a lot of my photographic concerns here are turning up in the video, but it's something else that's happening too. Let's look at one more. I'm going to look at one more piece of video, and then maybe we can have a little conversation, okay? So let me close this. This video is this is a video of an exercise. I'm going to play it, but I'll tell you a little bit about how we start out. We take a group of, say, 10 or 12 people, and they're standing in the middle of the room, and I say, start moving. Whenever you see a space between 2 people, walk through it. And then when you get to the outside, just come back. Don't speak. Stay in that same kind of soft focus that we were in that last exercise. Stay in that soft focus. Don't speak. don't laugh, don't poke each other, behave. And then I give them some directions later on that will seem impossible. And they, so the whole thing is here. So what you guys are going to do is come toward the center of the room, and I'm going to trim some of you off, so you guys are now watching, and you guys are the core here. And what I want you to do is I want you to start moving around in this space, and whenever you see a space between people, just move through it, and everybody can just start moving. And stay in what I would call soft focus, which is you're not looking so much ahead, you're looking more in the peripheries than anything. And you're not speaking, you're not acknowledging each other, but you're very aware of each other. And make the spaces twice as big now. Same pace, but twice as big. And move half as fast. And make the spaces bigger, but stay slow. And I'd like you to identify somebody, just know where they are. Just pick somebody, don't let them know you're watching them, but just know where they are all the time. Even when they're behind you, if they disappear behind you, then pick them up again when they come into view. But don't let them know. And now, pick somebody else. Let go of that first person, pick somebody else. And just know where they are. And now identify a second person and be aware of where both of them are all the time. And now, I'd like you to form an equilateral triangle with those two other people. And I will promise you it can be done. We'll be done with this in about 3 or 4 more minutes, maybe 5. Now the point is not to get this done or to get it done quickly, but to just follow the simple task. This is just what should be happening. This is good. This is good. Any adjustments? Are we being honest here? Okay. Huh?
Where I gotta be.
Cuddle up. Very good, very good, very good. Don't talk. It'll go better if you don't talk. Very good. No, I salute you for pushing on it. Very good. Very good, very good. Good. Okay, are we getting pretty close? Okay, very good, very good. What happened between the time when I first said do this and everybody goes, you can't do that, you know, the mind was, no, and then what happened? It got quieter, it got quieter. The discussion with yourself about whether this was possible or not drifted away, and it was not solved except by kinesis, just by this. And by getting out of your own way, shutting up, not laughing. I mean, these are all just stages, marks you have to go through, and then suddenly it just gets real quiet, and you're in a different state. And even if even those of us who are watching it, go from thinking about it to just this whole other thing, which you can't verbalize, you can't analyze, and shouldn't bother analyzing. It's not going to help you any, as you found. Terrific, terrific, very good. So that's, I was going to try that here, but I'm glad we didn't. But it's one of my favorite things, because between the time you give the instruction and everybody says you can't do this, human beings cannot do this, 5 minutes later it's done, 8 minutes. I've done it with 20 people. And, you know, you could see it there that there was a stage where people said, come on, the point is to get this done. Why are you moving like that? But the point is not to get it done. The point is to be in that state. And then it gets done, which is quite wonderful. People, often a self-appointed general arises and starts directing people what to do, but that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I think we do have time for one more that we could do together, though. So if I could get the house lights up. I see all those volunteers crowding to the front of the room here. There will be no embarrassment in this. Okay. So good. You're a ringer. You know what it's like. So I'm going to just stack this chair. So we have a little more room to circle here. And maybe if you could move your chair in that nook over there. This is going to be tight, but we'll just do it, you know. So we're going to make a circle here. And we don't need page 5 anymore. We don't need page 4 anymore. Okay, so back as big a circle as you can make in this space. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we need another couple of people. There we go. Okay, good. We have our 6. My telephone. Okay, so you guys can come over here so we have an absolute circle. And as much space in the middle of it as we can give it. So back up a bit. So here's the task. I'm going to play a little bit of music. And what I would like you to do is to take this piece of paper and take it and just take it to somebody across the circle, give it to them, and you're going to change places. I'm going to take your place. You're going to give it to somebody, anybody in the circle you like, and you're going to change places, and then you're going to give it to somebody, and so forth. And the thing is, we're going to play music while this is going on, and the music is going to change from time to time. And so the trick is to move in some way that is suggested by the music. Does this give us enough room? It's going to have to. So just even if you have to stand on people's toes, it's okay. Oh. All right, so you guys ready? Can I get a little more volume? Back up a little bit, just so a little dancing around me. Okay, very good.
Can I go back?
Yes, you can return to your seats now. Okay, so very interesting little thing. I love to do it with a group of uptight people. I've often wished I would get that Thursday night phone call from the New York Times Magazine saying we need a shot of the Supreme Court, and I get to go down and I get to say, guys, humor me on this. I just want to ask you to do something. Right? Let's make a circle here. I bet it would be good pictures afterward. Is there anything that they did not see in this group? If we did it again, they would eventually do it, but if there's anything this time that people did not see. Other people. If we did that again, two people would be passing with a paper. Stand up for a second. And the music would suddenly go into a tango and they might just, do this. But they elaborately did not deal with the energies of the other person in this one. If we did it again, that would happen. The other thing is that nobody doesn't know how to do this. Everybody is thinking, oh, it's coming to me. I'm going to look like a fool. Everybody's going to look at me. Nobody's looking at you. They're all so concerned with how they look. They're not even seeing you. But I've never seen anybody not have some inkling of how to move with the music, and then how far you let yourself go into that is where it gets interesting. I did this once with a group of teenagers in Massachusetts. The girls were good. The boys were awful. They were terrible. 15, 16-year-old boys. Stand up for a second. Guy'd get the paper. He'd just go. Their parents came in that night, and I did it with the fathers and the sons. And the fathers were dancing the paper around, and the boys were just, oh, God. Take me away. Let me die now. But that goes away eventually. But the thing is that as, a photographer sees something exciting, what does he do? He puts a machine in front of his face, And this once it gets you out from behind that machine, you start to act differently, you start to work differently, you start to relate to people differently, and they start to relate to you differently. And the more you widen your seeing, these are just ways to really see it very clearly. We'll put the camera down and do something like this, and you can see something in 5 minutes that it might have to be pointed out to you many, many times. I want to read you one more little moment Unless I balled it up and threw it away, which I might have. Jesus, I did. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay. So I want to quote this wonderful poet, Charles Wright, who has just been made poet laureate in the United States, which I must think would be an awful job, an awful job. Write a poem about healthcare. Come on. But he said this. He was being interviewed, and somebody said, "How do you come to the things so that you can? How do you decide what it is that you want to write about?" He said, "No." He said, "I write to find out what I have to say." And that really is, when I heard that, it was like a key going into a lock. This is how photography works too. And I want to tell you a story about. As I say, I never studied photography, but after I've been doing it for about 6 years, I was teaching at the New School, and I thought it would be good to study with somebody, and it would, in particular, be good to study with Lisette Modell. Now, Lisette was teaching at the New School at the time, and she was the photography teacher in New York. She was the one who sort of taught Deanne Arbus and sort of uncovered her and encouraged her out into the open. And she was cranky, and she was brilliant, and if she'd say things to you, and if you could take them, you could really learn a lot. But they were sometimes hard to take. She'd hold up a picture and say, "Darling," she was about this tall. She had white poodly hair. She wore always black, 2 pins on her sweater, little gold poodles, one with red eye, one with a green eye. And if you could take what she had to say, she could really cut through stuff. She'd say, "Darling, don't do this again." She said to some person, she said, "Lizzie, go take pictures of things that are ugly." And it was just what that person needed to stop taking these lovely pictures and add something else to them. So I went to her. I called her up and I said I was a colleague of hers at the New School, and I would love to, perhaps she would take me as a private student. And she said, "Well, come down, darling, bring your best work and bring some of your worst work, and we'll talk about it." Kind of an odd request. So I went down to her apartment on 7th Avenue South, and I brought my best pictures and some of these others that weren't so good. And she goes through them. "Give me your best pictures," she said, and she starts going through them. "Oh," she said, "look at this. Like Strand. Better than Strand." "I hate Strand," she said. Something was coming. So she gets to the end and she says, "Darling, these are fine. Why have you come to me?" I said, "Oh, I think they're okay, but I think they lack something." She said, "Life. They lack life, you know." But she was right. You know, in the beginning, you want to get the reins in your hand and control the horse. And so if something went up here, something came down here. If there was black here, there was white here. If there was trees, it was in a row of trees that led off to the horizon and stuff like that. She said, "Show me your worst work." So I give her this other little stack. And there were things like somebody standing there, but at the last minute they had moved and their face was blurred, or somebody had stuck their head into a shot at the last minute and stuff like that. And of course, that's where she found the things that were trying to get away from me. And she was saying, you know, follow the things that are violating your perfection rather than concentrating on the perfection. And she also then she took out, her husband was a painter, and he'd done a series of paintings where everything was slightly skewed, these abstracts. And she said Evsa was doing these paintings, and I thought, that's very interesting. So I went out with my camera. She used a square format. And she said, "I did all these pictures, and everything was slightly skewed." And she had a stack of prints like this. It was not like going through files. They were all big prints. And she said, "And you see," she said, "none of them work." And I was so touched that she would show, listen, this is a way to go wrong, by the way. So in the end, I gathered up my stuff and I said, "So could I, you know, study with you?" And she said, "No, darling." She said, "I have nothing to teach you. But you have so much to learn," she said. She was right. And so that's sort of what has brought together the stuff in this book, just following that. And I don't have an end to this talk. I've never had an end to this talk. Well, they're going to chase us out of here. So listen, no end, but I'm online. You can email me if you have questions. Stay in touch. That's it. Thank you.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.